Good morning. I'm Kirsten McGregor, and we are at this month's SAGAX Associates Resilience Roundtable. And we have Courtney, and am I pronouncing it right? I should have asked you, Zaugg. Is that how, or is it
Zaugg? That's right.
Zaugg,
Yep.
okay.
Yes.
I should have asked you before because we've
That's
obviously been
okay.
by first name basis.
Yeah.
And it's Plaka and Associates based in Indiana, right? And
Right.
we met, and of course, met is the new. How do you really meet? There's people who I consider best friends with work who I've never met for 3 years now. So you had posted something online, and I think we should get to that later. But it resonated with me, and I commented on it, and it was wasn't one of those like, oh, thanks for sharing. I actually had like a long thing and agreed with you completely, and was so happy that someone had brought up that dialogue. And again, we can talk about that later. But I do think it's interesting how people are meeting organically and authentically through LinkedIn, and that it's not, I mean, there's been several meetings like this, and women promoting women. That's not what this whole concept is about, but I do love promoting other women and showing what they do. So if you could give a summary of what your company, and I know you have a few, so if you start with Plaka, but I know you have a few ventures, like all of us have a bunch of balls in the air.
Right.
So why don't you talk about like who your clients are, like what type of work you kind of focus on? Because we do definitely have complementary work, so I hope we get to work together in the future. And is there a geographic area that you service? And you can talk about the other businesses as well.
Sure. So Plaka is 3.5 years old, but I call it an innovation impact consulting firm. It is really focused on entrepreneurship-led economic development. So traditional economic development, think strategic plans, industry analyses, workforce assessments. I still do some of those things, but on the entrepreneurship side, it's using data to help community leaders, whether you're an economic developer or an elected official, real estate developer, think about how to create more diverse and sustainable economies by focusing on entrepreneurship strategies. So I've been in consulting about 9 years. I've been in economic development 14 years. I worked at the international level. I worked for the state of Indiana. I worked for some municipalities here in the region before launching Plaka in 2019.
Yeah, you have some other things going on too. I mean, I know that this is your main thing and how we met, but did you want to mention some of the other things that you have? Because I do think it's interesting, like when you're in entrepreneurship, you have like, oh, look, like I want to start
this. That's right.
Because you're good at starting things, right?
Yeah. And you want to like conquer the world. Like, I see all these opportunities and these problems. Let me solve them and do something about them. So maybe I'll tell the backstory about how Plaka was started. And then that relates to an organization called Bunker Labs that I'm an ambassador for. So my husband's a Marine Corps veteran, and we met early on. He served a couple tours and used the GI Bill, was working behind a computer, hated every second of it. And we kind of spun our wheels struggling through that transition. And before going to the Marine Corps, he framed houses. And so in 2013, he had joined an organization called Team Rubicon to clean up after a disaster in Illinois. I'm sure you're very familiar with Team Rubicon with your work, Kirsten. And he came home, different. He found his brothers and sisters in the veteran community. And he also remembered that he really enjoyed building things and working with his hands. And so after he came home, we started putting together some plans for him to start a construction company. So in 2017, when our daughter was 6 months old, he launched Zaugg Contractors. And what's interesting about that is, construction, which we're a small company. We're not curing cancer. It's not a super innovative company, but it was very difficult. He had the technical knowledge. Neither of us had the business knowledge. And it was hard. And I just thought, it shouldn't be this hard. It shouldn't be this hard for veterans. And in my work in consulting, which is across the country, when community leaders would say, they focus on 3 legs of the stool in economic development. It's business attraction, business retention, expansion, and entrepreneurship. And that last piece was really a lot of BS. And so I knew when I was going to launch my practice, that's what I wanted to focus on. So that's how Plaka came about. And then, the hat with Bunker Labs, we have a new chapter here in Indianapolis. It's a little over a year old. Bunker Labs is a national incubator program, accelerator program for veteran and military spouse entrepreneurs. And that's a passion of ours. And so we just launched our first accelerator cohort called Veterans in Residence in July. And so we're off and running and building out the ecosystem to support those entrepreneurs.
I love that. And I have this later on my interview list for you, but I never really worked with the military in this year. And we're going to put all these links in the comments below afterwards so that people can see, because with recording, you can't put them above. Anyway, so I'm working with a great client. We're wrapping up a SEDS update in Connecticut. I just want to thank Paul Weitz-Carver. He was captain of New London Submarine Base. So thank you, Paul.
Oh, yeah.
And actually, this was my first stint, was working with the Society of American Military Engineers. And so they wanted to learn more about the economic resilience part, which I thought was interesting. So I did something with them in the fall. But also, he's not going to expect this, but Rob Nicholson is someone who I've been talking to for the whole pandemic, trying to get the blue economy up and running in the Delmarva, Delaware area. So I just wanted those military people who I've been working with on a pretty close basis, thank them, and thank you and for all that you're doing, because I do think that these types of programs are important. And also, I'd like to say, for someone who's been in business for over 10 years and has been in this space for over 20, I actually am still finding it hard to learn the federal system, the procurement. Yeah. It's so much, and now we're competing with these huge companies. So, yes. And then the whole veteran set aside. So there's a lot to it that people need to learn beyond just the regular startup. So I think that, are there any other challenges that you think, just learning through your husband's work and perhaps working with Bunker Labs, and that you can talk about?
Yeah, a couple of things. One would be, the stigma with mental health. I can't even count the number of times either people have asked me, or they've asked my husband, or they've asked in the hiring process of my husband, like, is he okay? And it's incredibly frustrating. If you at one point when you meet my husband, like, my husband's great and wonderful, and many times much more sane than I am. Yeah, like he is even keel, and I am not. And so it's incredibly frustrating that there's that stigma that still exists, and so that's still a challenge when it comes to hiring, even as an entrepreneur. And when you meet him, there's still those questions that people ask or whisper. And then the other challenge is I think the translation of skills, and I'm not an expert in this, but the translation of skills is very broad and very deep, and there's so much that gets lost in translation, and it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be that way, but I think if we could simplify that process, and good folks are doing that, we could go a lot further, and entrepreneurs can be a lot more successful, and people can, move up the economic continuum if that was simplified.
Yeah, and I can't agree with you more that what I'm noticing, especially, this is how we talked. So maybe we're kind of jumping around a little bit, but that's good. That's fine. That right now, with all this federal funding, that we're expecting the Inflation Reduction Act to be signed soon. If it hasn't already, I've been kind of working 24 hours, not sleeping. But then we also had, ARPA, of course, and CARES. All this money, that's great. But if you don't have the local and regional and state capacity to manage those funds, procure those funds. So it also translates on our client side, where they're having trouble. And the other thing, just like any industry, I'm noticing across the board, there's huge vacancy rates in government and economic development districts across the country.
Oh, yes. Yeah, and I think that relates back to how we met. The post that I had on LinkedIn was about, economic developers, the economic development field. They're overworked, they're underpaid. The industry and economic development is completely undervalued. and it's the system's broken, and it's time to think differently. And the lack of capacity, it's going to harm things for decades to come unless leaders have some courage and take a step out and say, no, we're going to try it this way. We're going to be entrepreneurial and try some pilot projects and see what works, because great things have happened. Great investment, great jobs, great companies have happened, but there's a new evolution in economic development that's much broader. It's much more important to talk about and plan for. How do you create a resilient community? How do you create a diverse economy so that not all of your eggs are in one basket, and when the market shifts, you're Detroit. And Detroit has actually done really great things since having those, really harmful shifts. But how do you learn from those things and invest in 10, 15 years down the line? It takes courage. It takes courage for elected officials to say, you know what, I may not have this, I'm not going to see the return on investment in the next election cycle, but I know that I'm laying the groundwork for my children and my grandchildren, and that's really what's important.
I think that legacy aspect that you're talking about, I think when the pandemic first started, I did a video about economic. That's when I realized, when I scaled out my business in the beginning of the pandemic, seeing that not just elected officials, but leaders in general were having a hard time wrapping their head around looking at the bigger picture. And I think that's, with my focus being economic resilience, and it has been for over 10 years, that part of economic development. And a lot of people do what I do. I'm not the only one who does it, but it's the bigger picture is you can't look at economic development without looking at infrastructure, without looking at so you've got all the different economic development
impacts.
Stuff,
oh yes,
everything, education, and we saw that with the pandemic. Everything is daisy chained. You can't look at anything in silos. So of course that's the huge challenge across the board, and where I think that's, quite frankly, though, you brought up the word value, where consultants like you and myself and boutique firms, and there's a lot of them across the country that can support and bring value to these economic development districts and states, where we're probably a better value than hiring full-time employees, which they do need. But I still think a lot of places that aren't disaster prone aren't seeing that value that consultants can bring and lift from them. But you talked about courage too. Do you have a strategy in mind where you try to approach that, or is this just something that you're learning through? I mean, I know it's a big split, right? I didn't know if there's anything, like, when you talk to people, or common threads that you've picked up on with that
regarding how to encourage them to step out.
Or just that, like, even telling the story, like, about the mindset shift that they need to embrace. Is that something that, because even that conversation is a hard conversation to have, right? So it's like,
it is. It is. I equate it a little bit to you're a small business, you serve your local community, say you have a local bar and restaurant, and then the mindset shift is, I have a really great product here. I have a great community that not only am I investing in, but they're investing in me. How do I scale this? How do I take this bigger? And so that shift is like the what if, and those questions about what if we did this, that I think if we can get, frankly, more entrepreneurs around elected officials to ask the what if questions, it'll help. I think in our conversations, we not only, frankly, as entrepreneurs, like, commiserate of all the challenges and, like, man, this is really difficult, right? But the other side of that is, but then that you get energized, and you also, you're able to bounce these ideas off of one another and think, like, what if we did this? What if maybe I need to, calibrate my approach for this thing. Oh, I did this last year and it was really successful. Why don't you think about trying that? Like, you need to surround yourself with the people that are pushing you and asking those what if questions, because if you're not, it's stale, and you just are you're going to just always be with the status quo. And that's, from an economic perspective, it's frightening. It's frightening to think that way.
It's the opposite of resilient and sustainable. And I had a post on how both of those are different. But the other value that you brought there was you didn't say the term, but leading practices or best practices across the country. So I think that's the different, you know, angle you can bring, even if you're working in your home state. Me in Delaware, I mean, I work all over the country. I've worked abroad, and I want to go back to international with you, because that does help bring. It helps your honestly your mindset as a consultant. You're triggered by different ways of doing things if you've worked all over in different environments, rural, urban, tribes, islands, mountains,
Yes.
isolated. So I think that's big. But I wanted to go back to your journey because you did study abroad, and you mentioned at Brussels, right? Was it Brussels?
I did. I finished undergrad in Athens, Greece, and then I
Okay.
went to grad school in Brussels. Yeah, both amazing experiences. In between those two, I lived in New York City for a couple years. So thinking about resiliency, I moved there without a job and knowing anybody, and I don't think it was a smart move, but I do think that like being able to adjust and thrive and frankly survive. I could go anywhere. I think after that, I was like, I can move anywhere and I'll be fine because of those experiences.
Oh, absolutely. When I took that contract with USADA down in the Virgin Islands for me, because it was hard being a mom, being away from my son. So I was like, I can't do this. But it just made me that much stronger, to your point. But yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. But you also brought up another time that we talked about your parents and their influence on, and I was on your website too. So you mentioned them. So maybe that now that is different from how I grew up. So I've heard this before. So if people have grown up in an environment, and so I was wondering if you could just explain a little bit, because this has come up in different ways, but you're the first one I think who's had entrepreneurs, which is
it's so interesting, and it took me a while to kind of put the pieces together. So on my dad's side, so I'm fourth generation Greek. You know, great grandfather came over, started basically a food cart that blossomed into catering and wholesale foods. And then my parents, my mom and dad, owned several restaurants. And so there's this, even in the greater family, other family members had restaurants and businesses. But my parents lost the businesses. All of them went out of business. And so I grew up in a time when it was painful and we were extremely poor and embarrassed because of that, because, you know, you had this lineage of entrepreneurship and frankly success, and that was gone. And so when my husband and I started the businesses, it was scary, you know, like being an entrepreneur was never something that I ever would have said, yeah, that's, I want to do that. Like, I'm going to try that because I could see the pain that could come from it, from failure. But I think the benefit has been growing up that way. We designed our lives to absorb shocks to the system, and we not knowing that entrepreneurship was a part of the future, we made financial decisions and family decisions that provided a foundation that we could be successful. And I would encourage anyone thinking about that to think about it from that perspective. Like, design your life in a way that you have freedom to take risk, and you have freedom to do what you want to do and pursue your passion. You're not tied to things that don't allow room for that. So yeah, it's, you know, my father passed away before we started the businesses. And so I think now he's, you know, probably like, what are you doing? I can't believe you're doing this. But also at the same time, you know, proud, very, very proud that we've been successful and we've done so much in just 5.5 years of being in business.
Oh, absolutely. I'm sure. Well, I'm sure. But you bring up something you said that you can't be tied to. So, and I think that this is unique for mothers. So if you're comfortable talking about being a mom and being not just having your own business, but being entrepreneurial, because it does impact your decisions to do things. For me, now that we're traveling, it was actually so great to be around my son and not travel and have to worry about childcare. But booking trips. I mean, I've been traveling a lot, and sometimes I bring him with me. Sometimes he stays home. Obviously, he can't be with me all the time. But I don't know many men who have to think about that. My assistant uses. She puts the school schedule on my schedule to know when I can do meetings and stuff. So I do
Yeah.
think it's different for women and men. So maybe if you could give your take on, well, especially during the pandemic too, because I think some people have some funny stories, but how you
Mine are not
work with that.
funny. I want to cry.
That was funny to
Yeah.
I mean, my eyes are starting to water up.
Yeah, I think, well, one, kudos to the single parents, because I can only imagine how difficult it is. I have a good partner, who in the middle of the pandemic was working a lot, and so it was my daughter, who was 3 at the time, and I think you and I had talked about, it was, when you're at an age like your kid, you had to be with your kid to entertain, to teach, whatever it was, right? And so it was, okay, after she goes to bed, I'm up till 1 or 2 a.m. and then I'm up at 4 or 5 a.m. to get work before she gets up. And that was months on end. And I'm not unique in that. So but how lucky am I to have had my business to be able to do that, right? Like there are days when I don't have flexibility in my calendar and I can't do things with her, but it has afforded me to be able to design my life and my schedule based on what I want to do. And that means that I do drop off for schools. She doesn't ride the bus. I choose to drop her off. I choose that extra time. It also means that over the dinner table, my husband and I toggle between life and work constantly. And I had a friend ask me a question about, like, well, what does that conversation look like to your daughter? Well, what does she think of as she grows up, of what a partnership in a marriage looks like? I'm like, that's a really good question, because we toggle all the time. We can easily go from house, school, let's go for a walk, let's do your math homework, to, hey, I need to invoice, or have you invoiced these folks, to, hey, I need to run out to the job site. It's just, it's a constant. I think it's good. I think, here's what I do know. I am a better mother and I'm a better wife because I'm an entrepreneur. It's not for everybody, but it is, like, that is, there's no wavering in that. I know that. And I think because of that, she'll appreciate it at the end of the day.
Absolutely. There's obviously stressful times where you ebb and flow because you hunt for your for your food, right?
Yes.
So it does get scary sometimes, but I know that the way I'm using my brain and how I function, my mental state, that I'm actually a much better mom, having run my business. So thank you for that. But you bring up your husband, and you brought him up a lot. So I actually did want, if you're okay with it, how did you guys meet? Because I do think it's important, because I mean, I'm a single mom, and it's important to have that spouse who supports. If you don't have that, you either are in my situation where you don't have it, or you're in a situation where you start resenting each other, and and then we end up murdering, and we know where to put the bodies.
Yes, agreed. So we actually met. I was his waitress at a bar. That's how we met. Yeah, and he was very gracious and didn't hit on me the first time. I think a couple of things. We were older when we met, and I think for us, that was a benefit. But especially when starting the construction company, we had very serious conversations about, at any point if this business stuff gets in the way, we're going to kill it, because, you know, your home, your relationship with your child, your relationship with your partner, if that is not working, then your businesses will not be successful. And we've stuck to that. You know, like, we have really leaned into that, and we know that things ebb and flow. There are busy seasons and there are other seasons that we spend more time together. But at the end of the day, what it has also provided is, when we are together, whether it's my husband and I, or the three of us as a family, that time is very focused. But it was establishing those standards up front, and we've stuck to it. We have absolutely stuck to that of if ever this doesn't work, we're not going to work. And so that's proved really
That's
beneficial.
good advice. No, that's good advice for anybody, you know, going into something like this. I think I'm thinking women, but it would work both ways, to have those conversations and be able to think how that impacts. It's because it's not like it's not a regular job. I mean, of course, my parents are always like, well, why don't you go work for, you know, and
go get a job,
right? Yeah. You know, like benefits and you know, obviously I live comfortably. We talked about this too, though. I think that goes back to the values that you have with your husband and your family. And how this is how I was brought up too, that, you know, you can enjoy certain things, but you don't need to go crazy, because you never know, you know, when things are going to change. And I think how you were raised sounds like you have that foundation within you. We have a few comments. There's been people watching on different social media, so I don't know which one. I think these ones are from LinkedIn. It doesn't have a name, but they said, "Woo Bunker Labs, go Courtney."
Yeah, Bunker. Yes.
Yeah, they didn't have their name, but Gary Odom says yes, absolutely. So I'm sure that had to do with what we're talking
Gary.
about.
Yeah, Gary's a part of the Bunker community, but he's also a real estate developer, doing some really cool stuff. So yeah.
That's the next thing I want to talk about. And there's one more, Linda Stevens. I can't imagine not being an entrepreneur while raising my children. It was just normal for them. And what a great, honestly, maybe we're crazy, but like, isn't it great for children? As you were saying, how does your daughter look at you and your husband? Also, like, looking at you and how you're bringing home, you know, you're bringing home the bread, right? So I think that that's a great example. But you brought up real estate, and I'm having trouble. So maybe you can give me some advice here. That I'm a counselor of real estate, and I'm working with a number of real estate professionals, meaning like appraisers and attorneys and economists in real estate. But what we do, and I know what we do is slightly different, but let's just talk economic development in general. They're having a tough time. They see the value add, but they're having a tough time seeing where we could be working more directly. So I think most of our clients tend to be regional governments, state governments, city governments, chambers, those types of, but like when it comes, I do think that there's a space there for real estate. I've been telling the story in the back of the envelope, and some people just I had a call with someone yesterday. She got it right away. And some people, it's just really tough to see that nexus between real estate development and economic development. So maybe since you do both, you could give me some advice on that. And people who are watching this after, I can refer them to this.
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. I think it depends a lot on the developer, and it depends a lot on the community. So if you have a community that really wants to focus on supporting underserved communities and neighborhoods, the Black and Brown community, the veteran community, there are lots of different ways that you can come up with creative solutions for real estate development that still the developer gets a strong return on investment, and also the community gets a very strong return on investment. Just bottom line, never mind the social impact, the long-term impacts, the qualitative impacts that will be seen down 5-10 years down the line. And there's good stuff happening. But again, if you have communities that, I think, and to pause there, like I think with the pandemic, things have definitely shifted where people are thinking about real estate development more comprehensively and more long-term, and that's really good. But yeah, I think, figuring out the comprehensive approach, thinking about resilience, thinking about diversity in housing stock, in your commercial real estate stock, diversity in the types of businesses that you grow and attract to your community. That's the big picture. It's not just about attracting the large manufacturing facility and the large logistics facility. All good things, still good things, but that's one very small piece of the puzzle. And I think the innovative leaders that are either recently in the decision-making role or are coming up through the ranks and will be coming, into that role in the next few years, they're thinking about that. And the next generation after us, the Gen Zs, they are thinking of that too. And so again, it's not about us and it's not about solving the current problem. It's about making sure you're trying to solve problems that are coming down the pike and being prepared for that. So, actually Gary can even talk about some of the social impact investing and real estate development that's been creative, the work that he's done out in the DC area and in other regions. But yeah, it's happening. How do we elevate that profile and how do we get more people to do it? I think it's just conversations like this. It's more education about why it's important and how you can have an actual return on investment if you focus on the broader data, the broader social impact side, the broader underserved communities, because it's been successful, just not it's not as been a high profile, I think, in some communities versus others.
Well, and like you said, of course, that's how we each time, right, is it depends on the community and it depends on the developer, which obviously that's why you can't just cut and paste. A lot of, we know some contractors do that, but
that's right.
it has to be, you need to take the time and care to customize it to that community. That's why I think stakeholder engagement is so important. But
yes.
What you said about entrepreneurs, about having more entrepreneurs around the table with elected officials and leaders, the same I think is true for real estate development, because they're usually involved in different ways. And I think looking at it from, they're looking at it from, of course, their ROI and getting their site, building inspection and that type of thing. But on the flip side, looking at the bigger quality of life that's going to bring more tenants in, that's going to bring more residents in, more talent in. It's just a spinoff. And I think that quality of life aspect that you kind of talked about, that's where I feel like maybe we can work on a white paper or something, that it's simple to us, but I don't know that maybe people are seeing that connection there with real estate development.
Yeah, I would agree with you. So when I think about quality of life and quality of place, it is the coffee shops, it's the meeting places, these third places that are what retain talent in your community and attract talent. And so if you build your economic development strategy around placemaking, and then including it in how do we attract high growth entrepreneurs, how do we attract minority founders, how do we attract veteran founders into that fold? It's a success, all the ingredients to build a really successful recipe. And communities are doing it. Fishers, Indiana, put the flag in the ground saying that they are an entrepreneurial community, and they did it based on real estate development. They based it on creating a town, basically a city center. They did it based on negotiating creative lease and office space to support small businesses and entrepreneurs. So it's not rocket science. It's just thinking a little bit differently about what does real estate development really mean to this whatever community.
Yeah, but it never is rocket science. But what I'm learning is that what we do is actually hard for certain. I think actually the general mindset for people to understand what we do. Again, it's not rocket science, but I don't know that people can think like we do, where we're looking at all the moving parts, and if this happens, then this happens. You brought up a couple things of being intentional. I think that's so you're not just checking boxes. You didn't use the term, but because of the space that I'm in, response. So that's what I know about Rubicon, Team Rubicon. I mean, that's response relief, like right after the disaster, and that's important. I think we were in this response phase though with the pandemic for like 2 years, right? So we weren't able to look at the longer term. And now I'm starting to see, because we're starting to see the RFPs come out too, that we're starting to look at how can we recover and be more resilient in the future, where we incorporate those concepts that you just talked about. One thing I wanted to bring up, and I know this is in my wheelhouse, but to get your take, we were talking about capacity with ARPA and other big funding sources and the double-edged sword behind that. The ARPA, as we know, funded a lot of huge grants for communities across the country, including state plans and resilience plans, a lot of it from EDA, not just EDA, Treasury. I'm noticing a hesitancy to not just, even if there's capacity, but to spend, I'm thinking Treasury, ARPA, that they don't have an action plan. They're either throwing spaghetti at the wall and taking like that low hanging fruit, or they're like freeze, like a deer, that. And my concern is actually more that communities are going to have their funding deobligated and returned back to the U.S. Treasury because they're not spent. They're just so scared they're not going to be compliant. And I think that that's something that people like you and me can help communities pick like 3 priority projects, help them prioritize them. How can develop a roadmap? How can you get there? And there's all this funding, not just the big supplementals that we've been hearing. There's a lot there. So just with what your experience has been, I mean, I could go on and on, but because I've worked for the feds, but what with the clients that you've worked with.
Yeah, you're spot on. I mean, we've heard communities here in Indiana also say, we're just returning it. We're not even going to entertain. We're not even going to touch it. We don't want to talk to anyone. Like, it's just too much. And, that's such a missed opportunity. But I think beyond that, I fear the disparity growing between the haves and the have-nots. A lot of the dollars that could be spent because of the timeline, we're going to be spent, like those projects were going to happen anyway. And so then they have extra dollars. You're like, oh, and we can also do this. And then you have the communities that are under-resourced, that don't have the capacity and don't even know where to start, that, starting from scratch to build a plan to then hurry up and try and use the dollars to implement it is it's hard. And so again, you have the folks that have the resources that are going to increase the distance between the two communities, and the state, it was meant to do the opposite, and yet it's exacerbating the problem. And so, I think there's a lot of communities that need help from you.
From a lot of
really,
there's a lot of pie out there right now. So
there is certainly there is, but it's sad. And so, in 5 years, when someone does the analysis on it, they're gonna be like, yeah, told you so. Like these dollars weren't, they didn't do what you thought it was going to do. And it's too bad, because it didn't have to be that way.
Yeah. Because this is not an opportunity I don't think we're going to have for probably decades where this happens again, where we have this opportunity. And you bring up a point too, like, some communities have told me after the fact that they didn't apply for such and such grant, and because they didn't understand one small aspect of it. I probably wouldn't have even charged them and told them, oh no, that's what this means. And they didn't hire a grant writer or anything, just because they thought, oh, we won't qualify because it said this. That's what's disheartening. I do hope that DC starts to, especially when they start writing these, we call them NOFOs, Notice of Funding Opportunities, that they build in that local support. I mean, if they're going to build in money for inspector generals, then maybe on the local level, building support, and not just a little support, a lot of support because procurement, project management, managing people like us, the contractors, and having that staff and the administrative and the compliance and reporting and the accounting, there's a lot that goes into it. In these bigger cities, these bigger metro areas, and it's not across the board. They have, like you said, the capacity to work with this. And I'm just hoping that DC sees, if they're going to give billions of dollars out, that have a percentage with that to help these communities manage those funds and go after.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, the state of Indiana hired folks at the state level, like contractors, to help facilitate some of those conversations. But I think it would have been better had that help gone down into the county and the local level. I think that would have been a little more impactful.
Yeah. We're actually doing that here in Delaware through the university here is how we're going to try and support the communities here. So and it wasn't easy. I got to give a shout out to Troy Mix from UD, and there's some other people he worked with the state to get that through. So hopefully we'll be able to help communities, not just like teach them the fish type of thing, so that when they do have funding in the future. So we're getting up to 40 minutes and want to kind of wrap up. I try not to get them too long because people actually do watch them after the fact on YouTube or Facebook, but mostly LinkedIn. If you could give, how to get in touch with you, your website, any closing thoughts that you have based on what we talked about today.
Yeah, well, so my website's Plaka Associates, PLAKA Associates. I'm also on LinkedIn, very active on LinkedIn. And I've really enjoyed chatting with you every time, and I look forward to working with you. And any way that I can support other females in the field as well, I'm here for it.
I'm telling you, Allison was on from Metrics Together from Albuquerque a couple months ago with me, and then we were on a team together and we got a project successfully. So who knows? My fingers crossed. So this actually does work.
Excellent.
Maybe I'll get my crystal ball out. I will be putting links in below. I'll probably reach out to you to get some of the other links so that everybody can go to those. And if we mentioned anyone, we'll try and tag you or put you in the comments below. My company is Zaugg Associates, and we're based in Wilmington, Delaware. Provide all the economic development services, but focus on resilience and recovery. And since I've worked for the federal government and worked in the disaster space, I've got a lot of experience with the funding part, which is a double-edged sword, as we've said. You can reach us. I'll put it in the link, and I'll put in the links below. It's SAGAXassociates.com. And my son has been running around, so thank goodness we've avoided that so far. And I'll have the links to, if you want to put your email in there too, so they can get in touch with you. But thank you so much, Courtney, for taking the time. I'm glad your kids are in school, but mine's running around with a swimsuit on. So, but I do want to thank you because I think it's so important for women to support women in our field in particular. I think it's important too. So thank you so much. And thank you everybody for watching. And if you have any questions, reach out to either of us.
Yes, thanks a lot.